come up in the next section. So what we're going to do is to allow each of the table to share some of the issues that they've discussed, but also to inform you that we are under Chatham rules, but we're making a recording of this, not for sharing anywhere, but only for purposes of UNESCO that recording this conversation. So I hope that is comfortable with everybody. If you not, please let us know. But it's for only our purposes. So can I? Where do I start? Okay. So let me start where I'm closest. I will start with this group. Who is speaking?
When we looked at the document, with reference to the question based on UNESCO's objectives and approach outlined in the draft framework, are there any notable gaps or areas of improvement? We have highlighted about 5 of them. One is in the title, inclusion of media practitioners and content creators, that has not been replicated all through the document. At some point we talk about journalists, in other points we are talking about media professionals. So if it could be replicated all through the document. And this will be in line with the definition of the UNESCO definition of who a journalist is. Our second, what we noted second, the document focuses on content moderation. There's a gap on the surveillance and safety of journalists, both online and offline. We gave an example of what happened in Kenya recently, where journalists were harassed because of what they published. The enforcement agencies really harassed journalists based on what they had done, their work. And then we also looked at, the document refers to information trustfulness or trustworthiness, but shouldn't we be looking at it as information integrity? So it is more encompassing. Then we also asked, the net effect of harassment is psychosocial issues. So we need to expand the document and the guidelines to take care of psychosocial care or psychosocial wellness and the mitigation of this towards journalists.
Thanks so much. The group, could you also share with us, some kind of writing recording that, and then we'll take it forward. Thanks so much for the discussion. I'll come to this group over here. Seki.
Thank you very much. We did not really have enough time, but I think the general discussion here was in relation to who exactly are we speaking about in the paper. Because are we speaking about journalists and media workers in general, or are we including all the human rights defenders also? So we're speaking about media, but also about activists, and they have quite different objectives. So I don't know, at least I think, it would be sharper if it was really for journalists and media workers. That's not necessarily to exclude the others, but it becomes more vague if it includes everyone. Another thing we talked about was like, who are these platforms? Is it also an application developed in Nairobi for social purposes? Like, who are we talking about? Who are the recipients of the guidelines? What size do you need in order to be able to do this? Are we talking about the big tech? Or are we talking about everyone? And when does it stop? Are we also talking about Uber and Airbnb? And it's not clear exactly who is it that we want to direct this framework to. And then we talked about, a lot of it is wording, but the document also mentions a lot about context. What does context mean if we are in Silicon Valley and someone tells us to analyze a context? Is it a local, a national, a sub-regional, a continental? What is the context? And then it goes through the document, what is it exactly that needs to be analyzed, you know, and that's also a bit vague. The design, the development, the promotion, the deployment, sales, licensing, and use of products and services. What does that mean? So, yeah, I think that's what we managed to discuss during the 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think you raised very important issues about the sharpness of the category, journalists and media workers or journalists and media professionals. That is, it excludes human rights defenders in general, but we need to sharpen that to make it clear. Therefore, but also to note that in terms of which platforms, I think we need to make reference to the guidelines which define what platforms that we talk about. We read it in broad reference to the guidelines, and I think Anna Christina will make some of these clarifications. This group.
I have been chosen because I'm Gen Z, but it's okay. So a lot of the points have already been discussed. I won't take too much time on the ones that have been mentioned. But one of the key gaps we identified is mental health. It has been mentioned on the other table about psychosocial support. It's one of the critical things that's been mentioned, but not in great detail. We also realized that the framework is looking at platform providers and journalists and media professionals, but there's a critical role for employers. So journalists who are under employment, what duties does their employer have towards them when they're being harassed online? There's also a gap when it comes to monitoring and evaluation. How do we measure success of these interventions? And in the same process, as we identify those gaps, how are we addressing them to meet the needs of the final consumer? There's been a question, or rather gaps raised about definitions. Who exactly is a journalist? Now there's TikTokers, there's people who are actually performing the roles of journalists, but they are not in the traditional definition. Does this framework cover those types of situations? And then an issue was raised about the examples given, not just looking at international. There could be regional nuances that are missing because of looking at a wide lens. And then another one is the role of government or state authorities, not just platforms, because addressing the issue cannot just come from one lens. There are so many stakeholders that are in this process, and the state is one of the key players there. And then the last one is on defining vulnerability. What exactly is vulnerability practically? Because it means different things in different contexts.
Thanks so much. Gen Z. I think there are some substantive issues coming out of there. For example, vulnerability. What is vulnerability? Can we have an exhaustive list of points of vulnerability? Maybe not. Can we have a substantive list? Maybe yes. So there are all those things that I think we need to think about. The question of who is a journalist? It's also, much as we also, our primary work is protection of journalists. I think we struggle with that as well. I mean, we all of you, IMS and everybody, we struggle with this. Who do we cover when we say journalists, media professionals, and media workers? I think these are very pertinent issues that we need to look at again when we are sharpening the language in the document. I come here to this group.
Thanks. Hi. We also had very short amount of time to discuss this, and I think much of what has been said already was discussed at our table. But I think in broad terms, when reading through the initial kind of overview, We also felt it was quite wide, it was quite general. A lot of the questions about definitions and who it applies to and regional specific contexts might not have been captured. So that was something that we spoke about. And then we actually kind of skipped and started talking about specific issues regionally, and kind of what we would consider as part of the risk assessment, which I think maybe would come a little bit later. I think one of the things which was mentioned was when you are doing the risk assessment, it needs to obviously be defined in a way which allows for emerging trends that may not be foreseeable right now. So the language needs to be broad enough, but also narrow enough for foreseeability for the platforms or whoever's, implementing these. So that was another thing that was kind of raised. I don't think I've got anything more which isn't going to be duplication of what's been said already, so I'll just keep it short.
Thanks so much. Emerging trends, how do we, if you have a document like this, that's, and it goes back to the issue of specificities, how much should we be specific in light of the emerging trends where you need to renew, you need to revise, and all these other issues. So here, Gen Z.
Thank you, and unfortunately not, or fortunately not Gen Z. Few of the things that we picked up that we believe could do with input. Number one is on the general objectives of the framework. We find that the focus is not clear, whether it is simply dealing with human rights risks or human rights and other related risks. So there's a need for clarity on that. The next has to do with, there was a need for clarity on number one of the elements on the context analysis. I think, let's just see if I can reflect on that directly. What page was that again? I think it had to do with the localization of policies, of policy for protection. I think, is that safety? What page are we?
You went a little bit beyond scope.
Right, yes. So we found, it's a page 9, okay. Our question was, how practical will it be for platforms that are operating in over 100 countries to make sure that, where are we? To make sure that they apply these policies within the local context. Maybe the mechanisms need to be cleared a bit. Given that it's over 100 countries, but also making sure that that we do not leave a room for platforms not to do, because we have left the guidelines to be overly open. And then moving on page 14, on mitigation measures, particularly on preventive measures, there is a mentioning of the need for end-to-end encryption, but also a mentioning of transparency. There will be a need that look like there could be a mismatch there. At one side, you are saying that there needs to be close communication, but also transparency. So I think we have asked that needs to be cleared. Page 14.2 on transparency report, we indicated there's a need for clarity and specificity on the regularity of this transparency report. How regular will they be issued? Is it a 1 month report? And also, I think very central here is who does it go to? Who does it go to? Does it go to government? Does it go to a media council? Does it go to within the local context? And then page 15 on point 4 again on training resources for journalists, or because it's asking for platforms.
Yeah.
Page 15.4, just last one, and I think it's also related to what we have had on training and providing training and resources for journalists. Again, on practicalities on how such training would be facilitating, yes, resources, but to who? Is it an agency? Is it government? Yeah, really just that maybe the following guidelines for implementation could clear that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Keep guard of those points because we're dealing about, I think, from page 3 to 6. But we are going to get there, so you can sort of amplify them. But I think, I mean, the issue of local specificities is very important here. Are we demanding much of the companies? How much can they go to in terms of local context? Is it at the country level? Is it at the regional level? And all these very complex questions. So finalement.
Merci beaucoup. Par rapport à nous, on n'a pas eu le temps de terminer, mais on a quelques points qu'on a notés. Le premier, c'est de s'assurer que le deepfake soit pris en compte dans l'élaboration de ce manuel. La protection des journalistes contre les deepfakes, la démocratisation de l'accès aux outils de doxing, aux outils de vérification pour les journalistes. Et pour le comment, on a parlé de la formation. Il est important que dans les curricula de formation, il soit intégré ces notions-là qui sont liées à l'évolution de la technologie, notamment à l'intelligence artificielle. Et aussi de savoir, est-ce que dans les objectifs, on peut prendre en compte l'influence ou bien le changement ou la modification des curricula de formation au niveau des écoles de formation.